Hey everybody! It's good to see you. Finally made it. Had some technical difficulties, but I made it. Let's get Brooke on here. Let's see. Let's see.
Hello, hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Good. Yeah, no, I
All
can hear
right.
you. Oh my word, my internet decided to not be my friend today.
Oh no.
Yeah, it wasn't fun, but that's okay. I just hooked up my phone and I'm like, all right, we're just gonna go with the phone today instead of my fancy setup.
Is there any way if you turn your screen, am I crooked to you? There, better.
Okay, I think that should work. I don't know how it's gonna look for the viewers, but
Are
looked
we
fine to me.
sideways? Madison, are you out there? Madison.
Madison, save us! Please put aside your whole vacation and come watch us.
Yes, of course. It's very important.
Pretty much, this is important stuff. Well, cool. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to episode 5
Yes, I think
of the
so.
Readers on the Wall. We're really excited to just talk with you guys today. We are going to be discussing Tyrion 3, Arya II, and Daenerys 3. My name is Harrison Jensen, and this is Brooke.
Hi.
Madison unfortunately couldn't join us today. She is on vacation
Ooh.
and is probably sipping a margarita or something on the beach and laughing at us while we're sweating. And I shut myself in my garage.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's pretty warm in here too.
Right? Oh my gosh, it's ridiculous. Well, cool. Well, hey, how's your week going, Brooke? Good,
It's
bad, ugly?
it's been busy. It's been hot, so people are nobody's fun when it's hot. But
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I turn into I get really tired. Like I fall asleep a
yeah,
lot
hmm
when it's really hot out, and it's just the worst.
I know.
Let's. Yeah, my week was eventful. My work van broke down.
Oh,
Um,
that's always good.
I got to have my car towed for the first time,
Oh
and
no.
no, it's fine. No, what was funny was um, he told me to this car shop that I know pretty well, and he dropped me off, and I was like, he was writing out the bill, and I was like, this guy could say any number, and I'd believe him because
Hmm.
I'd never had my car towed, and he was like, oh, it'll be $75, and I was like, that's fine, I guess. Like, you could have said 150, and I probably would have
Right?
believed you.
I know it.
Pretty much. Yeah, that happened. I guess that's kind of the big thing. My work week was a little funky, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we went to the water park yesterday, so that was fun. Beat the heat. It
Ooh,
was a good time.
that sounds so nice. Well, cool. Hey, before we jump in, I just had a quick little, ice-breaking question for us to share
Hmm.
that people are going to be dying to hear.
Of course.
Um, so are you a Marvel Cinematic Universe fan?
I'm sorry, what was that? You broke up a little bit.
Are you a Marvel fan? Like, do you go see all the Marvel movies that come
I
out, or are you like,
actually
meh?
I actually really haven't seen any of them except the first Iron Man movie.
Oh
So I
man, my
know,
question's so.
I know,
Okay,
I
okay,
know.
we'll modify because everyone knows superheroes at least. Okay, just give me like top 3 superheroes that you're just like they are the boss, and I'd love to meet them one day or something like that.
Okay. Superman.
Okay,
Um
I'll give that.
Superman and Wonder Woman
Oh yeah,
and
especially Gal Gadot who plays her in the movie.
yeah, yeah, really good.
Oh man,
And more.
one more.
I'm gonna go with Thor just because he's dreamy, I
Yeah.
guess. So
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, especially after they gave him the haircut, because the first 2 movies were just like, oh, that
Yeah.
hair, it's killing me. Let's see. Mine. If I could say Spider-Man 3 times, I would, because Spider-Man is Oh my gosh, it's like the coolest thing. I'm gonna go with I'll go with Spider-Man. I'm gonna go with Professor Xavier from the X-Men.
Hmm.
Really like him. And I'm also gonna go with Nightcrawler from X-Men as well.
Oh.
He wasn't really that cool in the movies,
Oh,
but
okay.
he's just a cool
Okay.
superhero in general. Okay, cool. All right. Well, awesome. Well, why don't we dive right in? Everybody who's watching or tunes in, if you guys want to comment or have any questions you have for us, you can just type it in the chat. We'll see it. Also, if you notice in the description of this video, I actually set up a email address for this podcast. It's
Ooh.
TheReadersontheWall@gmail.com. If you guys have comments on the show, things we should improve on, questions you want us to answer, you just want to say, hey, you guys are amazing, that's fine too.
I mean, really.
Yeah, right. You can email us there. Once again, it's TheReadersontheWall@gmail.com. Okay, cool. Well, we are going to jump into the first chapter that we read this week. This is Tyrion 3, and here's a small summary of it. Tyrion sits down to a nice meal of fresh crab with the Lord Commander and the other high-ranking officers of the Watch. They jest and talk and try to convince Tyrion to stay. Afterwards, there's a little contention between him and Alistair Thorne, which is actually kind of humorous in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Afterwards, Mormont and Tyrion sit near the fire, while Mormont asks Tyrion to speak to the king and other influential members in the kingdom to help support the Watch. While Tyrion agrees to this, he eventually brushes off Mormont and Mormont's claims of like there being wildlings and White Walkers. He's just kind of like, you know what, let's just leave it be.
Oh, she says we are
Um,
sideways.
Oh, are we sideways?
Yep.
Here.
All right. Let me see if I can
Sorry, Brooke.
balance this. It's that extra jack, on the darn iPhones.
I know.
Okay. We'll see if that works.
All right. Just don't touch it.
Don't move. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. So Tyrion just kind of brushes him off eventually. It's just like, all right, cool, I'll talk to them. Just, let's not worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And before Tyrion heads to bed, he decides to go to the top of the wall to have his last look around and runs into Jon Snow. They talk of his training, offers to relay messages to his brothers, and they wonder about Benjen's whereabouts. Tyrion's last thought is of what lies beyond the wall. So, Brooke, give me your first impression. What'd you think? Good, bad, or ugly?
My first impression, I liked the chapter. It was a good chapter. Nothing too crazy. Nothing too crazy happens except for the crab delivery. It was really good to see Sir Alistair get a taste of his own medicine. He definitely deserves it. And I just wish. It's another one of those, like Madison always says, one of those what ifs. Like if Tyrion had just listened to Mormont a little bit more, things could have been totally different in this story. So that was my main thought of the whole thing.
No, I totally agree. Like we can kind of jump ahead to that conversation. It's kind of understandable, but it's also infuriating us as readers since we know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mormont's kind of like going a little deeper. He's like, oh, there's been words of the wildlings moving north. Why are they doing that? There's words of White Walkers seen on the shore. Why are they doing that? And Tyrion is just kind of sending out these like, oh, they're probably blah blah blah, and oh, they're he's Mormont's trying to take the conversation to a serious section, and Tyrion's just kind of like, no, let's just keep it happy.
Yeah, he's like, people see mer people too, so yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's like, I just don't want this to get too serious. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it's just. It was just that was the thing that stuck out to me the most. Like even Tyrion himself, he was just like, well, this conversation isn't going to go anywhere, so I'm just gonna, I'll get to it. I'll do it for you, but I'm not gonna let you know that nothing's gonna happen from it, So.
Right. Well, cool. Here I just got a couple little discussion questions for us to answer, and then we can kind of share our little thoughts. So in this chapter, we're introduced to Maester Aemon, and we know Maester Aemon is basically a Targaryen who's sort of in hiding. He's up at the Night's Watch. He's kind of gotten rid of that name. But I'm just kind of curious. What did you think about his introduction compared to Maester Pycelle's introduction? They're both very wise men. They're both very high up in the order of the Maesters. Just what did you think about comparing those two introductions?
I thought that Meister Aemond's was definitely more like a subdued introduction. I guess what I'm
Hmm.
trying to say is that like it wasn't as flashy as Meister Parcells, and I thought of Madison's quote about Pycelle having the emeralds and the rubies and everything in his chains. Whereas with Meister
Mm.
Aemon, they mentioned the metal. So that's why I feel like his was a more like not so flashy, like a distinguished kind of introduction. I guess I'm
Hmm.
trying to say. I'm grasping for the word here. It's not. I can't quite find it, but
No, no, no. That's good. Yeah, no. It's I don't know. There's not really a. All right, we're going to describe Maester Aemon now. It's sort of like because the main introduction we get is when they're basically trying to convince Tyrion to stay on the wall,
mm-hmm.
and then Maester Aemon just kind of pops in. He's like, you know what? I think Tyrion is, he's a giant among men. He's so great that he, came up here, so on and so forth.
Yeah,
And I don't know. It just comparing his words to Pycelle's, like Maester Aemon just kind of exudes this kind of wisdom. You
yeah.
know what I
It's they
mean?
almost left him like this ominous being. Like they didn't go too far into detail with him, and he's saying like these kind of vague but not so vague things, and it makes him
Hmm.
like this not really mysterious, but like ominous, just kind of vague, and you don't really know quite about him yet.
Yeah, right. We don't get any of his background really.
Right.
It's just kind of he's this wise sage that's just kind of there. And I mean, you got Pycelle down in King's Landing. He's like, man, it's really hot. Man, I'm tired. And
Yeah.
man, hey, I know we're like crazy in debt, but do you think we can, afford all this? It's just like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, it's just so interesting to see two people who I don't know, I don't know how long they've both been maesters, but I'm assuming quite a long time. And just to see where both of them have ended up, even they're on sort of similar paths.
Right. Right.
Right. So yeah. I thought that was just kind of an interesting little comparison there. So the big question I had for this chapter, what do you think is the cause of the downfall of the Night's Watch? Because it's definitely not what it used to be. Um, there's a lot more backstory in like the Fire and Blood books and the history books. How kings and queens would come to visit the Night's Watch. People would volunteer to go to join the Night's Watch in more of a noble manner, and now it's just kind of run down
Mm-hmm.
and not a happy place.
Right.
Like I'm sure
Doom
John
and
had
gloom.
many moments where he's like, yeah, exactly. I'm sure John especially had so many moments where he's like, why in the hell did I do this?
Yes,
So like,
exactly.
what do you think caused it to just downgrade so hard?
I think it's just, some of it a little bit is just the passing of time. As things have gone on, there aren't the creepy crawly ice spiders running around, and there aren't signs of the others, and so the glory factor to the Night's Watch has diminished, and a lot of the nobler families aren't. Oh, Madison says she has a question. Sorry.
Ooh, we'll get
Yeah.
to your question here in a moment, Madison.
A question that might answer your question. So,
Ooh.
but I think that it's just the time factor that all of the glory out of the job has gone. So a lot of the nobler families, their sons aren't volunteering like the second, like the heir and the spare. The spare, who
Hmm.
isn't going to inherit the title in the land, is going to the Night's Watch for all this glory factor. Where if all of these creepy crawlies that are past the wall aren't out there anymore, then that
Hmm.
kind of diminishes it. So I think that's part of it, a big part of it, actually.
Hmm. No, I definitely agree. Yeah, here, Madison, if you want to post it up, we'll read it here in just a moment. No, I agree. Yeah, there just hasn't been any activity up there in so long that people are forgetting, like their purpose, the purpose of the Night's Watch, even in the beginning. I'm sure there's, like even Garrett, who was he was in the prologue. He was on the wall for what 40 years, and I
Right.
doubt he really saw much. Maybe a couple wildling raids here and there, but I'm sure there might have hit a point. He's like, "Why am I up here freezing my balls off and
Yeah. Yeah. I
hating
mean, it
everything?"
seems like there's a lot. The comparison for the glory and the good old boys time is a lot different to the doom and gloom that they've been seeing for a long time. So,
I agree. Yeah. So Madison question is, at what point in history did did being sent to the Night's Watch become a sentencing of major crimes? That is a good
Ooh,
question,
I don't know
and
the
I
answer to that.
honestly do not know. For like, man, the thing is, the Night's Watch has been around a very, very long time, like a very, very long time. So I doubt we're ever going to get a specific time, but I'm sure in the past, let me think, probably since the Targaryen rule, I wouldn't be shocked if that was when it sort of ramped up a little more, just because the Targaryens came in. They basically took Westeros, and now it's all under one kingdom. So they're the ones who are going to be making the decisions. And if the Targaryens decide, hey, there's this giant wall up there, and all these noble people are going working up there. Why are we sending them up there when we could use them in terms of alliances?
Right.
It's like, hey, I have all these nobles who I can align myself with instead of sending them up to the wall. How about I send all these people that I have in chains up there instead? They're still men. They're still going to guard there, and maybe the Targaryens were thinking like, oh, like it's also punishment for their crimes. That's just a guess. I don't know if that's true or anything.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Robin's just asking us how many times have each of us watched Game of Thrones. So I've watched, besides the last like 2 seasons, 6, 7, and 8, I've probably watched the show probably 3 times from the beginning to the end. I would say in terms of book readings, I've read probably 4, at least 4, I would say.
This is my first book read. The show continually, I've only watched it from beginning to end once, but I've seen each episode like multiple times.
Yeah, so. There you go. Which, by the way, is very impressive because Brooke has some great thoughts, and which is why I invited her to be a part of this podcast. And it blew my mind when she told me this. She's only watched it once. So
thank you.
You know what? Gold star to you, Brooke.
Thank
you. Star.
Snaps for me.
Pretty much. Boom. I love it. Let's see. I thought I had. Let me think. But yeah. I think just back to that question. There hasn't been a lot of activity up at the wall to make people concerned about what's beyond it. It's an easy place to dump criminals and have them punished there.
You're right, though. I like the idea of the whole alliance thing because even though there is the heir and the spare, a lot of the times the spare could still be used for like marriage alliances and stuff like that to bring the houses closer together and disagreements or whatever. So just to continue on that, because once the Targaryens came in, it was really important for alliances to be forged. And I'm not gonna lie, that's a pretty good thought. I like that. Props to you.
Let's see. I didn't really have any other big discussion questions. Let's see. Hold on. Prison. That's true, Madison. It totally is a prison up there. I mean, so this is a cool thought I read on a Reddit thread. Well, I think one of the major core problems of the Night's Watch is that when you join the Night's Watch, you're supposed to forego your name, basically, any claims you have. It was even they talk about in the book how you're supposed to basically forsake your whole family, which we know doesn't really happen that much because Jon is so attached to his family. Yeah. But if you were following to the letter of the law, you would go up to the Night's Watch and just basically let go of your whole humanity.
Yeah, because you're not supposed to take any women. You're not supposed to have family or any of that stuff. So
right, you're supposed to, like, they talk about it in the books later on when the war breaks out, how the Night's Watch is supposed to stay very neutral, like no one, like the king can't call upon the Night's Watch to say, hey, I need you, come down and fight with us.
Right, they're not supposed to be like the reserves. They're supposed to be an independent nation, basically.
Yeah, they're completely an independent thing. Now, the problem I have with that is that they're giving up their humanity, basically everything they care about, so that they can go to the wall to protect humanity.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because the main reason of the Night's Watch is, hey, we're going to go up to the wall, we're going to defend it from wildlings, from the others, from the Long Night, all these terrible things, so that the people in Westeros can live. And if you give up if you give up all the things that you care about and the things you love, then your motivation to protect it just goes down the tank.
Right.
So yeah, I think just that inner struggle is just increasing and increasing when you have people who don't have a strong belief in what the Night's Watch is for.
True.
You know what I mean? Because at this point, I feel like if you just disbanded the Night's Watch, everybody in it would go to their sides. You know, they wouldn't all of a sudden be like, oh, because, like, let's say if you follow to the letter of the law and you're released from the Night's Watch, you'd basically be like, oh, well, I don't have a home. I don't know. I don't care about my family. Where do I go? You know?
Yeah.
But that's not true in the books. I mean, if John was released from the Night's Watch, he'd go straight down and help out Robb. You
Right.
would have an opinion. You would have a side on the war. You know what I mean?
And maybe that's
So,
too. Remember last week we kind of touched upon Donald Noy's pin that he wears. That's his connection back to his old life. So they don't completely forsake it. It's not like the Faceless Men where you become no one and you know you forsake all your past and everything. They keep in touch. You know, most of them at least. I'm sure there's a few out there, but most of them keep in touch with their old lives, I think.
Well, I mean, yeah, especially as this book goes on. I mean, I feel like, I don't know if this is how it always was, but Mormont gets a lot of information sent to him, like, hey, there's a war breaking out. Hey, Bran is alive, and make sure John knows. You know, like, they're telling them to break the connection, but they're allowing the connection to stay there with letters and information coming up to them. Let's see. I thought I had something else. Another gold star. Good job. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it, and I think that's the main problem with the Night's Watch.
I know you had in the discussion questions. Do you think the Night's Watch has purposely lied about?
Oh yes, I forgot about that. Thank you for bringing that up. Do I think that? I will say I wouldn't be shocked if it's true that they're sort of trying to disguise how rough it is up there, because it's kind of like okay, I don't know, this popped in my head. So I live here in Oregon, and the Oregon coast, not the beach, the Oregon coast is usually cold and very rainy. But a lot of, you know, hotels and a lot of, you know, commercials, they show nice sunny days on the beach. And I think it's kind of the same thing. It's like, if you took a snapshot of the Night's Watch right as it is now, people would be like, why, what the hell would I go there? You know, like, God, that looks terrible.
Yeah.
Right? And we know that Mormont is trying to forge these alliances and connections with noble houses. He gave Waymar Royce the lead of that ranging when he totally didn't deserve it. He's trying to get Tyrion to talk to the king and the queen and all of these important
persistently.
factors. So, very persistent. Like, even because I don't know, I feel like Mormont's got, I don't know, I feel like he's good at conversation, and I'm sure that he noticed, like, okay, Tyrion's trying to brush this off, but I'm not going to relent.
Yeah, he's almost begging him to listen. He's almost begging Tyrion to listen to him. Like, things are dire. I know it doesn't seem like, you know, it's cold up here, and that's just the problems we have, but there are more problems out there. He's, like, begging him to listen to him.
Exactly. So, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if he's doing his best to sort of disguise what the Night's Watch is, but only to people who really trust him.
Yeah.
Or that he trusts, you know. Like, he brought Tyrion up, and he's happy he's there, and he wants him to stay, even.
Right. Yeah, so that's kind of what I said, too. Like, I don't think they're necessarily lying about it, but they're not telling the whole truth either. Like you said with those commercials, like the whole coast isn't all sunsets and beaches, you know. So
right. And, Madison, that is a good point. The Night's Watch does still have to participate in local politics in order to get resources and things like that. So once again, I think I don't know, like, just that main core belief of having to forsake so much to join the Night's Watch, it's almost like it can't be done in order to survive. You know, you got to have motivated men to guard and save the world, but you also got to make sure they're not running back home when things get tough. And, you know, like, it's a real moral struggle, I'm sure, with many of them. Yeah,
it's almost not to go so off track here, but it's almost like in New York here, they're trying to pass a law where they're raising the age to where you can buy tobacco to 21. And so a lot of people on all the news articles are commenting like, oh, well, they can go fight for our country, but they can't, go buy a pack of cigarettes or something like that. And it's almost that same kind of belief that they're giving up things to protect that right for all the rest of us. So, who would want to do that? You know what I mean? So it's kind of that same thing.
Yeah. No, I like that. That's a good comparison. Let's see. Okay, here. I'm kind of curious. This is just a little question I had. I don't really have a strong answer for it. But it sounds like, so first off, we learned that that Garrett's head was sent back to the wall. Like Ned executes Garrett, and his head was sent back. Which, by the way, that kind of shocks me. It just doesn't. I don't know. That just doesn't seem like something Ned would even do.
No, I know.
You know what I mean?
I know. It's almost like a warning, like, hey, you better check your men. You know what I mean? Like.
Right? Yeah. I don't know if that's like just a traditional thing you do. I mean, I don't know. I've never had any of my friends be beheaded before.
Maybe the only other thing I could think of was maybe because they're supposed to forsake their family. The Night's Watch is now their family. Where else would he send the head?
I like that. I really like that. Maybe, yeah, that's the way to inform them. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those like, dude, you could have just sent me a text. Like,
right, yeah.
Like, you could have you could have saved on postage.
Yeah.
The guy who had to write it up here probably took him like, at least 2 weeks just to write up here. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. Yeah, it just seemed a little ominous to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just curious. So it sounds like Mormont and Ned are in at least some sort of communication. You know what I mean? So I'm just kind of curious, like if Mormont sent a letter to Ned and was like, hey, there's a lot of crap going on up here. There's a lot of wildlings moving around. I'm getting reports of White Walkers, things like that. Do you think Ned would brush that off? I mean, either he did brush it off because he doesn't send men up there, or Mormont doesn't talk to him. Which in my mind,
they should talk.
Yeah, right. In my mind, they should talk, because if you think about it, so back in Catelyn 1, one of our very first chapters we ever read, Ned actually talks about, like, there might be a time that I have to send my armies up there to deal with Mance Rayder.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he specifically talks about that. So I'm just kind of curious. I guess what I'm saying, I'm kind of shocked that Mormont isn't using Ned Stark as a resource as much as
like he trusted Tyrion and like was begging him for resources, but it doesn't seem like he's talked to Ned like that.
Right. I mean, especially he's got his brother Benjen there too.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you already got an in, and I feel like if Mormont sent a message to Ned before he if Mormont sent a message to Ned before he accepted the position of Hand of the King, I bet you Ned would have double thought it through even more. He would have been like, okay, well, if I go south to be Hand of the King, I can't stay up here and help with this wildling problem.
True.
That's occurring. So, right. Those are good points, Madison. You know what, Madison? You could be on this show right now, I bet. I don't know what you're up to, but we miss you. We love to have you on the side of the conversation. Let's see. So I don't have any other discussion questions. I do have a good bit of just little miscellaneous thoughts. So, okay, tell me this. What did you think about the scene with Sir Alistair and Tyrion? Was it just kind of a humorous thing, or like did you have any thoughts about him?
Well, the only thing I had written down extra about that was I had just wondered if a lot of it, I mean, I know Tyrion was picking on Sir Alistair, but I wonder if a lot of it goes back to the fact that it was Tywin Lannister that told Sir Alistair either your head goes on a spike or you go to the wall. Mm-hmm. So that was what I had written down about that.
No, that's a great thought. I'll be honest. I think Sir Alistair's just a dick in general.
He is. This is true. Is true.
Honestly, like, the thing that's rough about it is so Tyrion and Alistair, they have this kind of comical little back and forth, at least on Tyrion's side, and then Alistair walks out of the room looking like he's got a knife up his butt, which I thought was very funny.
It seemed it didn't seem to fit the whole rest of the book. Like, it was like a weird sentence.
I feel like Grin like wrote it and he was like, all right, that's really funny. That's gonna stay in there.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure his editor was like, do you really want this in there? And he's like,
yep,
yeah,
I do. Yeah. It's my favorite line of the whole book.
Right. let's see. But yeah, like, so you have that exchange with him, and he walks out. And what I found interesting is Mormont almost like defends him in a way. Like basically Mormont's like, look, he's an anointed knight. He trains the boys, so on and so forth. But the thing is, he is like the exact opposite of what you want a knight to be. Like he's not a noble person. He is a total bully to everyone who's training with him. And I mean, he challenged a dwarf to a sword fight.
I know.
Like,
I know. And well, I had noticed too that Tyrion does at one point say, Sir Alistair Thorne should be mucking out your stables, not drilling your young warriors. And I was like, ooh, at first I was like, ooh, that's kind of harsh. You know what I mean? Like, it is. It's cold. There's not a whole lot going on. You know what I mean? He's probably just a cranky old knight. But then as we kept reading, and John had said how he had never even showed Pip how to properly grip a sword. I was like, he is just a bastard. He's just like, you know what I mean? Like,
I know. That's the thing. You're like, okay, well, maybe he is good at training. And it's like, no, he's not.
No.
Like, John's basically finding all these, those 14-year-old kids, just like, dude, what the heck?
Yeah.
You're not even doing this right. I found it interesting that Mormont, like I said, Mormont kind of backs Sir Alistair, and it at least the way it's structured in the paragraph, it's basically he's saying like he's a knight. He is an anointed knight, and that's why he's a good person, and that's why it works. Now, what I find interesting, to be honest, is that his son, Jorah Mormont's son, is Jorah Mormont.
Yep.
And Jorah Mormont's a knight too. He disgraced his house by selling poachers to be slaves, and it's just kind of interesting to me that Jorah Mormont the old bear would be like, oh, he's a knight, so he's good. But it's like, that's not. Just because you're a knight, that doesn't mean you're a good person. You know that.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on that, but that's a really good point. I also had written down in here, and maybe I missed it in the show, but I didn't know that Jorah Mormont gave up his title for Jorah because he thought it was time for him to rule, and that's why he went to the Night's Watch. I didn't know that. So I thought that was kind of even a worse stab in the back for Jorah to do to his father. Like, his father gave up everything and went to the Night's Watch for Jorah, and then he just threw it all away. So
right, I mean, it's a pretty serious thing here. I just wanted to Dana, she asked, do we know much about his past? I'm assuming that's talking about Sir Alistair Thorne. As far as I know, he was a Targaryen. He was on the Targaryen side during the rebellion. He was there at the sack of King's Landing, and once Ned and his men arrived and the Lannisters took over the area too, basically Tywin gave him the option of, hey, I'm either going to cut your head off or you can go join the Night's Watch. And of course he chose life, and he's at the Night's Watch now. That's as much as I remember. I could dive a little bit deeper into that. I'll make a note on that. Maybe I can do a quick little thing on him a little later. Okay. Let's see. So just a couple other miscellaneous thoughts I had in this chapter. So kind of along with that whole dagger up his butt line, the old bear is talking to Tyrion, and he says, oh yeah, he's like, now the wildlings are moving around. They're running away from something. We're seeing White Walkers on the shore, and it says, think on that. And I felt like that was kind of another. I feel like that was another kind of like almost modern way of saying something put in there, think on that now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Instead of like, we should be aware of that or whatever, he's like, think on that. It's just very like poignant. Like,
right. So a note on Madison's comment. She says, Jorah's past is confusing to me. Seems very uncharacteristic of him for him to do what he did in terms of selling people to poachers, poachers to become slaves. I just want to note, Madison, I'm sure you've read the books, so you should know this as well. Jorah's a lot more shadier in the books than he is in the show. He's a little more noble and a little more. Yeah. It's actually kind of basically in the show. When you watch the show, you're in terms of his relationship to Dany, you're like, oh man, that guy got friend zoned like super hard. And,
I think he even tells her that like the reason he sold the slaves was because his wife like spent all their money and she just wanted more, and he just wanted her to love him.
Yeah. That is the reason why he did it. And but like I said, in the show, it's kind of like, oh, Jorah got friend zoned. In the book, it's very creepy old uncle
Mm,
hitting on his young nephew or niece.
mm.
That it there hits a point that you're like, okay, like
Even the way they
ease
kind of
up.
described him in that chapter, in the Dany chapter, he's kind of like he's like
Hmm.
big and burly and whatever. So it does kind of give that kind of vibe right off from the bat, I think. But now he's just
Madison, just so you know, I'm gonna gush about Ian Glenn a little later. we'll, we'll get there. Let's see. I was kind of shocked at let's see. The old bear talks to Tyrion about the amount of winters that have occurred in his lifetime.
Hmm.
It says, "You are a young man," Tyrion, Mormont said. "How many winters have you seen?" He shrugged. 8, 9. I misremember. And I don't know why, but that just kind of hit me. I was like, "Wow, like that's a lot more winters than I think." Just because
the way
we
they
haven't
make
seen one.
yeah, the way they make, and also just the way they make it seem, Harrison's man crush, the way they make it
Oh
seem
yeah.
like winter is coming, and it's this harsh, terrible thing that it's really hard to survive through, and you got to be really smart and savvy about it. But the way the old bear says it, he's seen a few of them, so it's kind of like a I don't know.
Yeah, right.
They
Yeah,
contradict
I
each
think
other.
it's yeah, exactly. Well, honestly, it's kind of comparable to the Night's Watch. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we keep hearing about this dreaded winter and like how terrible and rough it is, but we as the readers haven't seen it yet.
Hmm.
And it's, we haven't seen it happen, so we don't understand how difficult it is. And, it's kind of like how the others are in the back of our mind, like, oh yeah, sure, that's the big deal, but we're going to focus on the politics now.
Right. Oh yeah.
It's the
Hmm.
same thing. We're just like, oh yeah, the winter. That'll come when it comes, I guess. But we won't worry
Yeah.
about it right now. But you need to worry about it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Let's see. Okay, here's another cool thing I was reading through and made a little connection. So when Tyrion is in Winterfell before he comes to the Wall, he mentions something like oh, I'm just going up there so I can piss off the edge of the world, which is I don't know, I always like that line. But what if I now in the show they do it, but in the books he actually doesn't piss off the edge of the wall.
Right. Yeah. Unless.
And I just feel like it was kind of like Tyrion got there, and he was just kind of amazed by this thing, this huge, giant 700-foot wall. And when he got up there, it just even blew his mind even more, looking out into the north, seeing all the trees, talking to Jon about what's beyond there. And
Hmm.
I think it just sort of, I don't know, I think he might have gained a little more respect for it. And like, okay, like this is something that I need to think about more often and keep them in mind.
I know. I feel like, yeah, because it talks about how he almost believes the talk of the others could be true, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
because it's just so amazing and dark, and because it talks about how like the moonlight couldn't even break through the branches and the tangled roots and everything of the black wood, and it just makes it that much more ominous and creepy sounding, and it makes the stories of Grumpkins and everything else that it makes it almost could be true.
Mm-hmm.
I wish he would
No,
just
definitely.
have kept that mindset.
Right? Especially later. There's oh, you'll see. There's a whole section that in the books that you're gonna be like, Tyrion, you are the worst person. You did that. Let's see. Last real note I had. I just really like the last line in this chapter. John's talking about like Uncle Benjen. He's talking about Uncle Benjen will ride back tonight, and I'll see him first and blow the horn. He never came though, not that night, and not any night beyond that. Give him time. If he doesn't come back, Jon Snow promised, Ghost and I will go find him. And then Tyrion says, I believe you, Tyrion said, but what he thought was, and who will go find you? And I just
Mm.
thought that was like another like ominous, like,
Yeah.
oh man,
Yes, there's
like,
something out there.
what's gonna happen?
Oh,
Let's, yep.
I was gonna say one other thing I had noticed too. I wrote down when Meister Aemon breaks into the conversation. He called Tyrion a large man and a giant, and I almost wondered if
Mm-hmm.
that was a subtle way of telling us, like, hey, he's important. He's gonna be pretty important in this whole story.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I feel like Actually, people have made connections. That's part of the reason people. So, Bran's vision, he sees those three shadows, one of them being a giant, and
Ah.
a lot of people make that connection. They're like, "Oh, that means Tyrion is that giant." I don't think that's true, but I think that is just a nice subtle way of Grimm making us know that, hey, Tyrion's going to play a huge role in this book. So you really got to keep an eye on him. I mean, especially, okay, so you have that reference of him being a giant. And then back in Jon's first chapter, it mentions how Tyrion's like walking back into the room, and Jon mentions like his shadow was as tall as a king.
Oh yeah.
You
Yep.
know, yeah, like things like that. It's just all these Tyrion being something larger than what he is. Could be, he has the potential to do something amazing if he
Yep.
just goes for it, if he does it,
Yeah.
and he'll get that opportunity once he becomes Hand of the King in the second book. But there might be more there that he's not letting out. Right, Madison? Okay, well, Brooke, did you have any last thoughts about this chapter that you wanted to share, or are we good?
No, I think that wraps it up for me.
Okay, cool. Madison, I don't know what situation you're in, but if you want to tag in at the end or something of any like big things you really got to share, I'll invite you on and we
Yeah,
can go through it.
definitely.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to Arya's chapter. This is Arya chapter 2. I love Arya chapters.
I know this one's such a nice one. It's just so heartwarming, and I just like it so much.
Yeah, seriously, this is one of those like, oh man, like you get the sadness of her reaction to Micah's death. You get the sadness of kind of the people, the Winterfell guards, her friends not being who they say they are. You get Ned being a great father to his daughter. I don't know. It's a very nice warm fuzzy.
Yeah, because it shows like a lot of time in the show. Arya didn't show a lot of emotion, and in this chapter, you really felt like you felt her guilt over Micah's death. You felt how upset it was that even though her and Sansa don't get along, now Sansa won't even talk to her. So, you feel how upset she is over that. And then when Ned comes in and is scolding her, you're like, oh, this poor kid. And then he lets her keep Needle and he hires Syrio, and you're like, oh, that's so nice.
Like life is good,
yeah.
Here, I'm gonna go through the chapter summary real quick, and then I only have one discussion question, but I have a couple. I have a few miscellaneous notes to share. Okay, so Arya chapter 2. Ned arrives late for dinner due to a meeting with the council. They were arguing. We don't know what they were arguing about. I'm assuming it was
probably the tournament.
Possibly yeah, probably. Let's see. Meeting with the council. The tournament, which will be in the name of Ned, as he's being appointed Hand of the King, is going to move forward, and he has set aside seats for Sansa and Arya. After Ned decides to retire for the day, Arya stays at the dinner table, reflecting back on Winterfell. She misses her brothers. She reflects on her father's on his type of ruling style, how he's very down to earth with his men, keeps them close to him. And then she looks upon the men of Winterfell before her and decides she hates them. She feels that all these men boast of their victories and speak of their bravery, but no justice was sought out for ladies in Micah's death. She leaves in a fury and is visited by her father in her room. He discovers Needle and talks to her about the dangers of King's Landing and that they can't fight among themselves when they're surrounded by enemies. He gives her back Needle and then hires Syrio Forel to teach her the Braavosi way of sword. Yeah, just honestly, this is probably top 10 favorite chapters in this whole book, just because, I don't know, we kind of went through it already, but like, especially even the quotes in it, you get the famous quote of, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives.
Yeah.
Quote there. Ned talking to, I don't know, like when Ned's talking to Arya, and is basically like, look, we've come to a dangerous place, and I'm not, he's not sugarcoating at all.
He's treating her like an equal rather than like a child, which is kind of what she's looking for. Like when they were talking about, how Ned talks with a different man every night at dinner, and Arya's like, I love listening to these stories. Like you can tell that she has a little bit of maybe a little bit of a mature mindset, but an adventurous mindset, obviously. And she likes listening to all the stories and everything. So it was just, I don't know. It was just, I love this chapter. The show did a good way every once in a while of throwing in like there was dark, 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 and then comedy line. You know what I mean? And this
Yeah,
chapter
right.
kind of felt like the same thing. Like, oh, it was dark and gloomy, and oh, here's a nice warm hug. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like, it's gonna be okay,
Yeah.
kind of. No, yeah, I really like that, Ned treating Arya as an equal, and I think that really does go back to his leadership style. What I found really cool was that when Ned invites somebody up to speak with him, whether that be Old Nan or Micah from the blacksmith, or his master of horse or whatever, they're talking to him about what they're doing. It's not like, hey, get the blacksmith dude up here. I'm going to tell him what needs to get done this week.
Right.
It's just, yeah, and just like how he's treating Arya like an equal, I feel like he almost treats his men as equals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which really has a huge impact actually in the story overall. I'm not going to dive too deep into it just because I don't feel qualified to really talk about it too much. But when if you compare like Ned's legacy compared to Tywin's legacy, and we know that Tywin is very focused on his legacy as a family.
Mm-hmm.
He's very like, family's important. We have to leave a legacy behind us, so on and so forth. And what's really interesting is once Tywin dies, his family just falls to shit.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they're backstabbing each other. There's all this crap that happens, and it's almost like Tywin was the glue that held everything together. Now it's gone, and it didn't matter,
Mm-hmm.
And then in the books, like, it talks about how when Ned dies, like, lots of the people in the North still have a ton of respect for him, and it's, later on it talks about how basically these mountain clans, these other families in the North are like, hey, we're here to save Ned's kids, basically, and we're gonna help rescue Arya from Ramsay, which is totally different in the books, but
Mm-hmm.
basically, yeah, they're just like, we're here because of Ned, and I just think that's really cool how it shows, like, Tywin actually has a line in the books where he talks about, look, you don't feed the dogs under the table, meaning, you don't share any of your wealth, any of your wisdom with the people who are below you.
Right.
And Ned is just the complete opposite of that. He's like, come, let's talk, let's be friends. I want to know who you are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that part of the chapter. It was a good part of the chapter to see just how good of a ruler Ned is. And, I mean, he really was fit to be a good hand had the situation been different.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I totally agree. Okay, let's see. The only question I really had was, what did you think about Ned's decision to allow Syrio to teach Arya the art of swordplay? And, what did you think about that? Do you think that was a good move by him? Was it bad? I mean, what do you think?
I think it definitely helped solidify Arya's feelings and beliefs on how, like, she didn't want to be a lady and she was going to grow up to be a warrior and everything. Had Ned kind of nipped that in the butt, I still think it would have been like this, daydream fantasy that she had. But the fact that he let her keep the sword, he hired a dancing teacher to teach her how to use her sword. I think that was really her in her mind going, he's giving me permission to be this person that I want to be.
I agree. No, that's a great little summary of it. Dana, your question, would you say Tywin was feared, whereas Ned was respected? I would say 100% yes.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think Tywin definitely ruled in sort of a fear style. I have the power. You're going to follow me. I mean, he's got the face. He's got the voice.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, especially in the show. I mean, Charles Dance.
Oh, he does a beautiful job.
Yes. So I would agree with that, Dan. So yeah, in terms of, yeah, by the way, I don't know why it took me like 3 rereads to really understand, like, oh, they're calling it dancing classes because people think she's actually learning to like dance
like a lady.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think I just got confused just because the style she's being taught is called water dancing.
Yeah, and it's kind of like fluid, like dancing, so.
Yeah, it just, I don't know why, it totally messed me up, and I was like, that makes so much more sense. Okay. Now, I think it was a great move by him. I think it's very accepting and emphasizing what she wants to do. I mean, I don't know, just kind of a lame like example would be like if my son came to me and was like, hey, I want to be a professional video, like a esport, competitor.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was like, no, what the hell? Like, why would you do that with your
Yeah,
life?
yeah.
You know, that's not going to lead to anything good. I mean, and even if it goes against what I think I want him to do, you know, if I encourage it, if I, you know, I don't know. I just feel like if you
He could
shut
be a
down
champion.
so, exactly. Like, I don't know. I feel like if you shut down people's dreams and shut down what they want to become, then it just, I mean, they're not going to be like, oh, all right, that's cool.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's going to hurt their
I,
feelings, and it's going to make them feel
yeah,
differently about the other dreams that they have afterwards.
exactly. Exactly. You had a really cool follow-up question. I believe it
Yeah.
was you
Yeah.
who asked, so, well, here, why don't you ask it? It's a good question.
I had asked, had Catelyn been in King's Landing, or had this happened at Winterfell, which probably wouldn't have happened, but do we think that that the decision to hire Syrio would have been the same? Do we think that they would have actually hired Syrio? And I don't think they would have. I think Catelyn is very traditional, and
Yeah.
she wants her daughters to grow up to be ladies and, you know, be you know, good examples of what a proper lady should be. And I don't think that it would have happened. I think she would have overruled Ned, and Ned would have been done with it. He wouldn't have wanted the fight.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with most of that. I would say because back in the Catelyn chapter when they're kind of dividing up the kids, trying to figure out where they go, she mentions like, oh, we need to send Arya down there so that she could become cultured and she can learn from the Southern ladies. So I think that's her specifically saying that. I think that goes along with it, that she wouldn't have wanted her to, you know, learn the art of swordplay and be taught that. I am kind of curious if because so the reason I say is I wonder if Ned would have basically snuck those lessons in somehow. And the only reason I say that is if you go back to Bran's chapter. Hi, Mallory.
Hi.
If you go back to Bran's chapter, let's see what happens. Let me think. Bran gets caught climbing Winterfell basically, and Ned's like, "All right, look, you're gonna stay in the Godswood for the night to you know, teach you a lesson or whatever." And when Ned shows up, Bran's in a tree, and he just kind of laughs and he's like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, okay, look, just don't let your mother know. Is basically what he says.
True.
So I'm kind of curious if Ned would have been like, "Okay, look, I'm gonna let you do it. Maybe like a once a week thing.
Yeah, keep it on the down low.
We're just gonna just keep it on the down low." So I lean slightly more towards that answer.
That's
but
true. Now that you say that, you never know, but that's a good idea. Except for the fact that there's a lot of, if it was in King's Landing, there's a lot of wandering eyes in King's Landing. So I don't know if he would have taken that risk, but.
That's true. I mean, yeah, that's true. I wasn't able to watch these scenes.
I didn't either.
To compare this week. Just had another crazy week. But one thing I do remember was in the show.
Oh, that's
Ned,
so Madison.
So.
Sorry.
Oh no, it's cool. I like that. I like that, Madison. That's a good line. I'll just read it just for the audio. And Madison says, and in the show, he gives her a winning nod of approval while she's shooting arrows in the courtyard. So yeah, that's like very first episode. She shoots that arrow, totally shows up Bran, and Ned's like, "Dang, yeah, that was sweet.
That's my kid." Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's just kind of cool to see parents just kind of accept who their kids are, and it's just uplifting them. So 5 points to Ned, gold star. So back to what I was saying. In the show, when Ned arranges for Syrio Forel and Arya to train, they're practicing, and it actually like zooms in on Ned's face, and he starts hearing sounds of battle in his mind, and slowly his face sort of just, I don't know, like despair basically goes over his face. And I'm kind of curious if that happened in the books off screen, but basically Ned was watching his daughter learning to fight, and he's like, I just introduced my daughter to a terrible thing in this world. Like, well, you know what I mean? Like,
I wonder too, because a couple of times in the books he mentions like, you're as wild as Lyanna, and now Lyanna's dead. So I wonder if that did happen off screen in the books. Like, he was like, oh no, what path have I just set her down? You know what I mean?
Well, it's true, because, I mean, that's a really, really good point, because the thing is, like, there's so many moments where Lyanna reminds Ned of Arya. Like, we talked about this in the last couple chapters where, you know, Arya is a huge fan of flowers, which reminds me of Lyanna. And, you know,
she looks like her. And...
yeah, looks like her, how she's beautiful like her. And, you know, Ned is seeing like, okay, she reminds me of my sister, who is dead, which makes him worry about that. And then he mentions how Arya has that wolf's blood in her, like Lyanna did. And then, I don't know if it's in this chapter, but he does mention at one point that his brother Brandon had even more of that wolf's blood in him, which is basically what got him killed.
Mm.
And so yeah, I'm wondering, I wouldn't be shocked if off screen Ned was like, okay, whoa, like I just, like there's a chance she's gonna die because of what I just did.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, I don't know if he thinks that hard, but it's one of those, like, if you teach someone to sword play, they're probably gonna get in a sword fight at some point.
Right.
Especially in the world they're in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I'm gonna read Mallory's comment. I like this. Oh, hey, my wife is here.
Hi.
Oh, hey, you want to say hi?
Hi.
That's my wife. Isn't she beautiful? Will you grab this?
She is.
But look, I don't see my daddy.
That's a lot of ice cream, honey. Can I have I'm just kidding. Here, I'm gonna read Mallory's comment because I like it. She said, "I always had a feeling." Oh, you're married to this nerdy person. I always had a feeling that maybe Arya was Ned's favorite. He sees the North in her the most, and pretty much, my wife agrees. Sees the North in her the most, and is always reminded of Lyanna. We all know how much he loved his sister, and I agree. I wouldn't be shocked if that's true.
Yeah, that is a good point.
I mean, I don't know. Like, Robb is probably a good candidate for his favorite.
Being the first boy.
Of course, parents don't have favorites at all in any way, so don't worry about that. But, I mean, the thing is, like, the reason why I think there could be a favorite is if you go back to Catelyn's chapter, she very blatantly has a favorite, and that's Bran.
Mm-hmm.
Like, basically, they divvy up the kids, and she's like, oh, yeah, Arya will go there, and Sansa will go there, and Robb will stay here. And then she's like,
you can't have Bran.
Yeah, you can't have Bran. He's staying here with me. And it's very just like, okay.
Well,
way to put that out there.
Yeah, and even after, I know she wasn't in the right mindset after Bran's accident, but she completely ignored Robb. She ignored Rickon, who is like 3 years old. He's still a baby, basically. Mm-hmm. And she just like completely
no, seriously,
ignores him.
that is, I don't know, like, just, I don't know. I've never had my kid get injured to the point where I went crazy like she did. But I just can't never imagine just totally neglecting one of my kids. Yeah. I mean, I only have 2, and she has like 7 or 6 or something like that. But
I know, but
I
it's
don't
know.
Still. Madison asked if my wife is a fan of Game of Thrones, and she actually introduced me to the show. So she's a good fan. She doesn't read the books, but she likes the show, and she always watches it with me. So she's a supporter of me, which is great. Okay, let's see. We were talking about that. Let's see. Did you have any discussion questions or anything you wanted to ask? I just have a couple miscellaneous thoughts.
I just wondered if you had any more thoughts on the whole how Ned found Syrio Forel.
I honestly don't know. Like,
at first I was, you always think doom and gloom with it, so I was like, dun dun dun, it's Littlefinger. But then I was like,
no!
Yeah. But then I was like, well, maybe it was Littlefinger. But even when Ned first walks into Arya's room after she leaves dinner and she's got Needle out, he calls it's a Bravosi blade. So I almost just wonder if he was just like, hey, I need a Bravosi guy to teach my daughter how to use this sword. You know what I mean? Like, so maybe that was.
He just put an ad out on Craigslist.
Yeah.
And was like, Bravosi swordsmen. Twice a week. We'll talk about pay.
Yeah.
Discretion needed. Things like that. I don't know. I think this is one of those situations where I think it's best if we just sort of like.
Right. It is what it is. Yeah. Sometimes things are just what they are.
And that's okay. It doesn't always have to be a conspiracy theory.
Right.
But I'll Google it and I'll find some crazy stuff. And yes, ice cream is amazing, Madison, and I wish I had one right now.
I know, me too.
Let's see. Okay, so I don't know if this is another thought I had that I don't think has any backing, but so when Ned arrives in Arya's room, she's holding Needle right, like, blatantly in front of him, which I thought was kind of funny.
I know.
I know, she didn't. Kid. Like,
she hid it in the bottom of her trunk, but she can't think to hide it when her father comes in after she had to unlatch the door.
Yeah, right. I'm like, okay, you have a sword and you're gonna unlatch this whole door and you're not gonna think, maybe I should hide this.
Yeah.
But he walks in, grabs the blade, and I don't know, like I felt so bad for Ned, to be honest, because I feel like he was looking at this sword, and basically he says like, "I'm supposed to run the Seven
Yeah,
Kingdoms,
yeah.
and I don't even know that my kid has a sword."
Yeah,
Like,
from my own
and it
my
came,
own armory. Yeah.
right? It's like they're armoring my kids, and I don't even know this. And I feel like Ned looked at that sword, and it was almost like a symbol of failure in his mind.
Yeah.
I don't think that Needle's does represent that throughout the books, but I think in that moment he was like, I'm failing as a father.
Yeah, like if this was a sitcom, he'd be looking at it like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. He'd do that sigh.
Yeah.
Probably what would happen. Arya.
Yeah.
Something like that. Okay, speaking of that, just anyone who's watching this, go on YouTube, type in Game of Thrones Seinfeld, and you're going to have a fun time.
Okay, I'll have to watch it after
Brooke?
this. Yeah.
No, let me know. I'm serious. It is so funny. But yeah, I just kind of saw that, Ned's sign, it's just a bit of failure for him, which really, really kind of breaks my heart, to be honest.
I was surprised.
Also,
go ahead.
I just like the part where, no, Madison, seriously, go type in Seinfeld Game of Thrones, and there's a whole video about them turning it into a sitcom. It's really funny.
Oh, God.
I just found it kind of funny. I don't know. I just had a funny moment where he basically has Needle, and he's like, I should break this toy across my knee right now. And then Arya's like, oh, yeah, but it wouldn't break. And then in the back of her brain, she's like, it probably would.
Yeah, I know. Like, that was stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just a nice, I don't know.
Like father-daughter kind of banter. You know what I mean? Like, it was just something wholesome.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing else behind it other than a father talking to her daughter. And that was her toy, and he was not going to take it away.
Exactly. And I don't, it's a nice reminder, just because these books can get a little, like, intense and a little gloomy, and it's just kind of nice to, like, and also just kind of a reminder that, hey, Arya's like, what, 8 or something?
Yeah, 8, 9, something like that.
She's 8. She's 8. She's under 10.
I think she's 9.
It's just a nice reminder of that. Yeah, it's just a nice reminder that, hey, she's just a kid. Like, like that's what kids think. Like,
yeah.
Like, oh, you can't break that. Oh, well, maybe you can, but I'm not gonna say it. I don't know. I found that interesting. I cut you off. Did you have a thought?
I was just gonna say, I thought it was kind of interesting, just how much Arya blamed herself for Micah's death, because she was so angry at Prince Joffrey and everything. I almost thought that she would take on like a blind rage kind of thing. Like, it's not her fault. It was Prince Joffrey's fault. He came up and he's the one who started this. So I thought it was interesting how much guilt that she had actually harbored once she got past all the layers of angriness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've never been in a situation close to that. I wouldn't be shocked if that's kind of a common psychological thing that happens to people. But I think part of it is, like, I think Arya kind of knew in her mind that her spending all this time with a lowborn friend wasn't something that naturally, usually happens. I mean, especially with Sansa kind of having that class discrimination and telling Arya about it. So I wonder if, I'm sure, that just kind of goes with what Arya's thoughts are. She's like, if I just stuck with the way things are and I didn't stray off like I always do, he would still be alive, and everything would be fine.
Making her doubt her own person, her own character.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just another. Yeah, this whole chapter is full of feels, and that's especially one of them. You're just like, oh my gosh! And then Ned coming in and saying, like, you have nothing to do with this. That murder's at the feet of the Hound and the woman that he serves.
Well, I think it was a big deal for him to say there was even honor in the lie. He hates liars. So for him to say that, I feel like that was a big deal.
No, I agree. I totally agree. Let's see. Just another small note I had was so Ned's at the dinner table at the beginning of the chapter. And he's basically he turns to Arya and Sansa. He's like, I am so tired of you guys fighting, and I expect you guys to behave like sisters. And I was like, but they are. Like, that's how sisters do.
Yeah.
Like,
me and mine didn't get along for a long time.
Right? Like, I don't know, like, same here. I mean, me and my sister didn't like each other for so long. And I was like, isn't that just the way siblings are supposed to work? Okay, so another big thing. Let's see, hold on. I'm just crossing some stuff up. Okay, So I probably mention this every single time we do this live show, but this is yet another chapter that our characters' dreams and the way they see the world is completely shattered and destroyed again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, once again,
Every
you got Ned
time.
up every single time, and I mean, you got John up at the wall. His fantasy, everything's destroyed. Arya's already had that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Sansa's having that happen, so on and so forth. And in this chapter, she's looking at the men of Winterfell, people
Oh
she
yeah,
grew
that
up
was
with,
sad.
trusts, and loves, and she's like, all of you are liars,
Yep.
and you guys are not nothing what you say you are, because because it's kind of true. Like, it's terrible to say, but there was no justice for Micah at all.
No.
And
Yeah, nobody, even, she was like, even her father, like, nobody, he's the hand of the king. You know what I mean? He, in her eyes, in everyone's eyes, he has this great power, and yet even he didn't stand up for her. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't change the outcome. And it's just,
no,
it's just so sad. She has, it's almost, it is. Grimm is making her like, she has no one. There's nobody here who's her friend. Everybody she thought that, would love and protect her didn't. You know what I mean? Like,
No, I mean, it's honestly, this is the chapter I read, and I was like, this is the turning point. This is the big turning point. And when you like, if you read this chapter and then someone told you what happens to her, like in the next 4 books, I I don't know, like if someone told it to you, you'd be like, that makes total sense compared based on what I've read. Like,
yeah,
he's totally gonna look for justice for to kill the people who have ruined so many people's lives.
yeah, and just learning not to
It's
trust anyone anyways. You know what I mean?
Precisely. So I'm kind of curious. So this is a very common thing, as I've mentioned a couple times, of dreams and the way people see the world is being completely shattered. Why do you think Grimm is doing that? Like, what does it do to the characters? How does it change how we feel about the characters? I know that's a big question, but just
this is a good one.
yeah. So I would say, Madison, I don't know if you just joined us, but I'm just going to repeat my question for you because I'm kind of interested for your thoughts. So my question is, like, why is Grimm doing this pattern repeatedly where he basically shatters people's characters' dreams and views on the world? Like, why is he breaking them up and making them change the way they think? You got Arya, who believes that the men of Winterfell are these great men, and now it's totally shattered. I don't know. For me, it's kind of like, I don't know, like, we tend to like characters like that because they're growing, they're changing, they're becoming a more mature person. They're realizing, like, okay, like, I can't stay the way I am based on the information that I've been given. I now have to adapt, I have to change, and I have to grow up in a sense, especially in these books, because it's kind of shocking when you think about it. It's like, wow, like, a lot of these characters are just kids. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I know. It's a lot of trauma
like,
to be happening to these little ones.
right? Like you got Cersei and Jaime and Ned, like, and Littlefinger, these adults. But I mean, it's I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if it's almost half. If you look at the POV chapters, it's like, wow, you have all these children whose lives are completely changing based on it. I mean, Dany's a kid; she's 14.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think it's just a way for him to kind of to mature the characters and change them to who they're eventually going to become. And it's very nice for it. I don't know. It's almost nice that we see the change happen in one chapter, and then it just continues onward from there. It's not like this way long arch of, like, oh, they gradually changed across the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's a great point, Dana. That is what happens in real life. I mean, as you grow up, your view on things change all the time, and I think it just makes these books more realistic.
That's what I was just gonna say. I feel like it shows that it's not the character starts here, he grows to here, he ends here. You know what I mean? It just brings that much more of a complexity to them, and it also I think emphasizes the point of every little thing could be a big thing. In the story, every little piece of information could lead to something great. You know what I mean? So I feel like it just shows that he's trying to tell you, like, every piece of information is relevant to where the story is going to go to, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
No, that's great. No, I will say that's probably one of the most important things to me when I read books is, if I'm reading this information, is it important?
Mhm.
You know, because I've read plenty of books where I'm just like, okay, well, that didn't really matter.
Right.
Or like, you know, that was kind of a fun like filler piece that was interesting to read, but it didn't really have something overall. And I feel like almost everything in these books is very important,
Mhm.
and you know, especially when it comes to the characters. Um, I just have one last thought. Did you have anything else that you
Nope.
wanted to share
That's
before
pretty much all I
Okay.
had.
Okay. My last thought is so what this is going to go back to when I very first read the book, and I didn't really have any frame of reference. I didn't know what was going to happen.
Mhm.
So if we go back to the chapter where Lady is killed, um, just my first time reading, I realized like, okay, there is a connection between these Starks and their wolves.
Mhm.
And my thought process was, okay, whatever happens to the wolves will probably happen to the kids at some point.
Mhm.
So when Lady was killed, I was like, okay, that means Sansa's gonna die. How is Sansa gonna die? And I thought, okay, how did Lady die? Lady basically died because of something Arya did.
Yep.
It wasn't really Arya's fault that Lady died, but you know, Arya
Arya's
did something.
actions
Lady,
led, cause and
yeah,
effect.
led to
Yep.
the death. So I thought, okay, Arya's gonna do something, and it's gonna cause Sansa's death.
Mhm.
And then, and me, you know, spinning my brain around when I got to this chapter, it says, let's see. So Ned's handing back needle to Arya. It says, "Go on, it's yours." And she took it in her hand. "I can keep it," she said. "For true, for true, for true." He smiled. "If I took it away, no doubt I'd find a morning star hidden under your pillow within the fortnight," which is a funny line in my opinion. And then he says, "Try not to stab your sister, whatever the provocation." "I won't, I promise." And I just remember reading that and be like, "Oh crap!"
Yeah,
Like
I was wrong.
Arya's gonna kill Sansa. Like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? So like we don't know the true ending of the books because it's not out yet.
Right.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Sansa could die, but I doubt it. But anyways,
Yeah.
that's just kind of little time travel back to when I first read the books. So okay, cool. If that's all we have on that chapter,
Yep, I'm good.
we can move on to Dany III.
We're on to my
Okay.
queen.
The queen, baby. Okay, so just a quick note on Dany for me personally. Every time a Dany chapter comes up, I slightly dread it. I'm just like, okay, it's another Dany chapter. And then when I start reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's not that bad.
Right.
Like I don't know why, but she's definitely the POV I struggle the most with. Maybe it's just because she's so disconnected from everything else.
Yeah.
That could be something, but
yeah, and you know, it's a good balance because every time I get to a Dany chapter, I'm like, oh, Dany chapter.
Stupid. Yeah, right. I like it. I like it. I like it. Okay, cool. Here, I'm gonna read the summary now.
Mhm.
So, Daenerys 3. Dany and the Khalasar have departed Pentos and have began their journey to base Dothrak. As they travel through the Dothraki Sea, Dany adjusts to riding a horse. You know, long times, distances of traveling. The lusts of her new husband have taken a toll on her as well. It's only after another dragon dream that she regains her strength and begins to speak like a Khaleesi. She commands the Khalasar to stop as she goes off on her own to surround herself in this new world, the Dothraki Sea. She commands. Her brother then arrives and begins to attack her, telling her that you don't command me. You've turned into this Dothraki slut. You're, you know, look what you become.
Rotten.
That asshole, right?
I
Actually, that's kind of a funny connection. How last chapter we had Ned, who was like encouraging Arya to become who she is, and then you got Viserys, who's totally
Just
the opposite.
beating
It's like,
Daenerys right down.
right, exactly. Yeah. Let's see. Dany's blood riders stop Viserys, but Dany ends up protecting Viserys, like, you know, don't kill him, please.
Mhm.
And then Viserys gets up and he's like, Jorah, you know, kill all these men and, you know, hurt my sister and everything. And Jorah's like, yeah, no.
He'll walk.
Dany then rides off, leaving Viserys to walk, which is a very kind of a shameful thing in the eyes of the Dothraki. Jorah helps Dany realize that Viserys will never become king, and then Dany rides off on her own. Once they settle in camp, she has dinner with her handmaidens, where they tell her the story of how dragons came to be in this world, and Dany reflects on this. When Drogo returns to the tent for the night, Dany leads him outside, where she takes a more leading role in their intimacy, and it is revealed that Dany is pregnant on her 14th name day, which is not is probably the creepiest thing you'll ever
A little bit, I know.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. I remember when I read that, I was like, okay, that's gross for one thing.
Yeah.
And it also because I read the books and then I watched the show and I was like, oh, okay, maybe Grimm wasn't trying to focus on their age as much. It was just kind of they're just young kids. But then I read that and I was like, okay, he is very blatantly telling us that she's 14. So it was a conscious choice for him to do that.
Yeah, well, you know, when going back to when we were talking about Arya and how she's only like 9 and all the children are little, but they're seeing all this trauma, kind of back in that time period, you know, they get married off at 13, 14, 15 years old. So they're almost like teenagers, kind of, you know, they're not, but they are. So
it's still I mean, that means she was married at 13.
Yeah, it's still weird.
I don't know, just the emphasis on it is so creepy to me, but whatever works. So since you are our leading lady in terms of Dany, what did you think of the chapter?
I loved the Dany chapter. I do think I will say
Shocker.
though, right? I will say though, it was one of the only chapters so far that a lot of the chapters, most of the time, Grimm makes them flow really easily, and I really had to read this chapter a second time because in the middle of telling her cause to stop and going through the Dothraki grasses, they talk about the dream and everything, and I thought it was kind of like a weird interlap.
Yeah,
like it wasn't very clear to me the first time. I definitely had to go back and reread it again to get the actual flow of it.
No, I agree. Yeah, the structure is it's I don't know, like, because I talked about this last week how Grimm likes to sort of put us in the future and that like in a timeline that's a little further ahead than she thinks back on her past. But I feel like this one was very like, okay, we're here, we're going to talk about here. Oh wait, we got to jump to here, and then we're going to hit here, and then we're going to come back. Yeah, I kind of agree. It was a little like, okay, hold on, let's read that page one more time just to make sure I got it.
But I did enjoy that, you know, Dany's starting to finally really come into her own as a Khaleesi, and Viserys is getting a taste of his medicine because it is about time.
Pretty much.
But I had a lot of like little notes and stuff, but we can start with the discussion questions if you want, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so I wrote down a couple new ones that I thought of, and hopefully we can hit all of them.
Yeah.
If I can remember. So one of the first things we learn in this chapter is when they were departing Pentos, Illyrio actually offered Viserys like room and board. He was like, hey, why don't you stay at my manse? And we'll wait until they get back from base Dothrak, and it'll all be good. And of course, Viserys is like, oh no, I'm gonna stay with him and make sure I get paid, and blah 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 blah. And then Illyrio's like, all right, cool,
good luck.
And so I'm just curious, why do you think Illyrio let him go so easy? Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's this big plan, which I know most of it, but it just felt very like I have this plan. And now I'm just gonna let you go.
Yeah, it does seem to like they give up control of Viserys.
Yeah,
you know what
right?
I mean? Like they're supposed to be spying on him and letting Robert know all their movements and everything, but then they just kind of like are like, okay, go ahead. I don't know. Maybe Illyrio at that point had realized like how Dany and Jorah talk. Like Viserys is never gonna be able to take the Iron Throne, and so he's just kind of like, okay. Go with the Khalasar, because guess what? Khal Drogo's probably going to kill you or something. You know what I mean? Like, he's just probably going to take you out.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'm curious, because, yeah, I'm wondering if that just really wasn't a big deal. Like, maybe Illyrio was like, you know what? I'm going to keep you here just because you're probably going to cause contention, and I want this to go well. Because basically the plan is he gave Dany to the Dothraki, and he's going to use the Dothraki to invade Westeros later on in the story. So, I don't know, but it felt very like, okay, I'm going to keep Viserys, like the plan was, I'm going to keep Viserys here so that they'll come back to, to repay him. But then when he let him go, I agree, it felt like that he just kind of let it, like, okay, I'm just going to let this happen and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't have a lot of control there. I don't know, I mean, maybe he trusts or has enough over Jorah Mormont to like, okay, he's going to keep me informed or else I'm going to
that's true.
Kill him or do something. So I don't know. It just kind of, even reading it the fourth time, I'm just kind of shocked how easy it seemed that he let him go.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it was weird.
It was a little strange there, wasn't it? Let's see. Okay, here, how about we talk about the dream?
We can do
Let's
that.
talk about the dream. Let's do that. Here, so just a little setup here. Oh man, hold on, I forgot. Let me think. Sorry, I just want to say I love this conversation about the grass. Like the very first paragraph we get.
Yeah.
Which by the way, I heard it in Ian Glenn's like perfect manly voice.
I know. I know. Me too.
I was just like, this is so good. Like I love this part. But what I found really cool was, he's talking about this grass. The Dothraki see this huge stretch of land. If you guys haven't seen the map of it, I mean, it's ginormous. I would love to go there. I think it would be beautiful. But he's talking about all these different colors of grass, so on and so forth. And then we get this really cool end of the world scenario that the Dothraki have. It says, down in the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, they say there are oceans of ghost grass, taller than a man on horseback, with stalks as pale as milk glass. It murders all of the grass and glows in the dark with the spirits of the damned. The Dothraki claim that someday ghost grass will cover the entire world and then all life will end. So, here's my cool thought, in my opinion. So it talks about how this ghost grass will cover the world. It's white, just like winter.
That's what I said.
Yeah, go. I was like, okay, that's, it's one of those, like, it's basically the same story, just interpreted.
Just in different religion. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. I was like, oh, this is like the Dothraki, version of how the world's going to end with the others. I was like, yes, I get it.
Now, and another cool connection is, I don't know, it's kind of the same quote. It says this with stalks as pale as milk grass. I believe back in the prologue, the others are actually described with that same word as milk, like as white as milk or something like that. Like I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, I just thought that was a cool.
I did too.
Yeah. Okay, so we get that conversation between them, and then it goes through a big stretch of basically talking about Dany.
She's got it rough, man.
Real crappy.
Yeah.
So not only do you have the stress of her writing, which she hasn't done before, blisters on her legs, she's getting tired. I mean, that's her life every day. And not only that, but I mean, Khal Drogo basically comes in and rapes her every single night, which is absolutely terrible. We mentioned this quote back during her wedding scene, how it went from this sweet, intimate thing that we were like, oh wow, it's not going to be that bad, and then we get this, which is very contradictory to me, and I think it's sort of like it's
another one of those view changers.
Yeah, right. And like I said in the last time we discussed her wedding night, I think that the ending of her wedding night was a mistake on Grimm's part, and I don't think it should have been there. But I mean, he comes in, rapes her every night to the point where she wants to kill herself.
Yep.
And I don't want to sound too serious or rude here, but I feel like people sometimes really downplay that, and they're like, oh yeah, but she overcame it. It's cool. It's like, no,
like
that's not okay.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, there was this one time I broke my leg and it was really hard to get around and I lost my wages and everything, but I got over it. I can walk again. You know what I mean? It's a lot more serious than that.
Yeah. It's I don't know. I read it when I first read it and really like ate it in my brain. I was like, wow, that really hit me kind of hard. So I just don't want that to be downplayed. So then we get this dream. Okay. So I'm going to read the paragraph before it, just to emphasize.
Okay.
So day followed day and night followed night until Dany knew she could not endure a moment longer. She would kill herself rather than go on. She decided one night. Yet when she slept that night, she dreamt the dragon dream again. Viserys was not in it this time. There was only her and the dragon. Its scales were black as night, wet and slick with blood, her blood, Dany sensed. Its eyes were pools of molten magma, and when it opened its mouth, the flame came roaring out in a hot jet. She could hear it singing to her. She opened her arms to the fire, embraced it, and let it swallow her whole. Let it cleanse her and temper her and scour her clean. She could feel her flesh sear and blacken and slop away. could feel her blood boil and turn to steam, and yet there was no pain. She felt strong and new and fierce. So, what did you think?
There was so
Oh,
much.
yeah. Brooke the Wise.
Look
Interpret
the
the stream,
what?
please.
There
Yeah.
was so much literal and symbolic symbolism in this stream. Like, it was so short. It was almost like the Bran POV of his vision. It was like so short, but there was so much meaning packed into this dream. I don't know if do you want to take it like line by line? Do you want to how do you want to go it?
Here, I don't know. It sounds like you got some good thoughts. So why don't you just go for it, however you feel, and I'll chime in with you.
Okay.
So, I don't know. I got confidence in you, girl.
Okay. So I just had kind of broken it mostly down line by line. I skipped a little bit in the middle, but
that's fine.
Just the fact that Viserys was not in it this time, I think that's the subtle shift of he is not the dragon and Dany is, and she is going to bring forth and be the mother of dragons. So I thought that was a very literal, like, Viserys isn't in the picture anymore. He's very weak, and Dany is really the strong one in this.
Now, what's cool about that also is, so in the dream he's gone, and like you said, he's not important anymore. And I think that's basically what happens to him in this chapter. Dany stands up to him and is like, "Look, you're not important to me anymore. I don't really care what you think." She even has that line where she's like, "He is so pitiful. How could I not see how pitiful he was?"
Yeah,
So
and she makes him,
cool...
walk. Yeah, and she makes him walk all the way in the back of the Khalasar and everything, which is like the biggest sign of disrespect in the Dothraki.
Right, and it's just a cool power shift too. You know what I mean? Like it's like, wow, like this guy who totally had control over her whole life just lost it all.
Yep.
Like right then. So, anyways, continue. I don't want to go off too much.
Scales black as night, wet and slick with blood. The biggest of the dragon eggs that Illyrio gave her for her wedding is black and has red scarlet flecks in it. So that's just like almost a whole literal representation. Like the dragon in her dream is going to be the dragon that eventually hatches out of this egg.
Perfect. I love it.
He says her blood Dany sent, so I felt like that could be symbolic of the sacrifice that Dany has to go through to bring these dragons into the world and become the mother of dragons. Go ahead.
Sorry,
no,
just,
go ahead.
Just to interject there, what I think is, so yeah, I believe it is talking specifically about that dragon, which is Drogon, and I don't know, like in the show and in the book, she does seem to have this strong connection with Drogon. Like, they both, Drogon's the one that she rides the first time.
Yeah, it's like she never comes out and says, "Oh, he's my favorite," but it's just
implied. But it's like, but he is.
Yeah,
it's just the way it is. So I don't know. It almost feels like there's already a connection between them. You know what I mean? Like there's already this strong bond between them, kind of like the Starks and their direwolves.
Yeah.
Like as soon as they got together, the connection's already formed and it's already growing stronger and stronger. So,
Yep,
anyways,
I agree. Then I kind of skipped ahead and I got to the part where it says the flame came roaring out in a hot jet. She could hear it singing to her. I felt like that was her Targaryen instincts going, there's nothing to be afraid of with this flame. Embrace it.
Yeah, I think it also connects to the funeral pyre as well. Yeah, I feel like this stream is not the same as the last stream, but it does have some connections there. The fire's all around her. It's not causing her pain. Even it talks about she could hear it singing to her. I think it's the last line in the book actually talks about dragons singing again.
Oh.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Since it's the last one, I can flip to it because I know exactly where it is. Okay, here we go. So this is the last line. It says, the other two pulled away, talking about the dragons, from her breast and added their voices to the call. Translucent wings unfolding and stirring the air, and for the first time in hundreds of years, the night came alive with the music of dragons.
Ooh, so I like that.
I think that's a direct connection right there, talking about hearing the songs and the music.
I thought, so the rest of it I kind of all put together. She opened her arms to the fire, embraced it, let it swallow her whole. Those first few lines, let it cleanse her and temper her and scour her clean. Those are like direct symbolism to the funeral pyre. Her, the fire just surrounding her. And, I think I didn't read ahead and I should have looked it up first, but I think I've read like in the articles that people post on the page that doesn't in the show, she's like, her hair and everything is untouched. She's just got like singe marks on her. In the books, doesn't it actually like burn her hair off and everything?
Yeah. In the book, she is completely bald at the
Yep.
end of it.
Yep. So that I felt like that was like just a direct symbolism to Dany stepping into the funeral pyre and everything else. But I feel like when it gets to she could feel her flesh sear and blacken and slough away, could feel her blood boil and turn to steam, and yet there was no pain. She felt strong and new and fierce. I feel like that is definitely showing that like her past fears and traumas, they're being stripped clean of her, and she's embracing the Targaryen fire in her blood, and she's becoming just a more stronger, confident woman, both mentally and physically.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. I absolutely love it. Man, okay, hold on. Sorry, I'm looking for Bran's chapter real quick. Where are you? So the other note I had, just that last part you were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
it felt very baptism to me.
Yeah.
With like how I was
Mm-hmm.
talking about the last one. Her whole body's being cleansed. It's burning out the impurities in her. Because I mean, her character changes completely. I mean, if you read the first chapter, her first chapter, and then you read this section of the chapter, you'd just be like, "Who is this woman?
Yeah, it's almost
what
like two
happened?"
different people. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have any more of this. Like I don't have any evidence towards this, but I was just thinking. So Bran went through something sort of similar, this huge transformation into who he was. He went through even a sort of baptism like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, thing during his vision, and then it's happening here with Dany. I'm just really curious if there is some outside source that is causing this to happen in Dany.
That is true.
Because it seems to occur. So this stream and the previous stream both seem to occur at moments in our life where just terrible things are about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was before the wedding, and it gave her courage, and now it's happening here where she's hit a point
she
of
can't
suicide.
go on. Yeah.
Yeah, right? And then all of a sudden this stream pops up just in time in order to give her courage and show her what she can become. So I don't know who. I don't know why.
It does
I
seem
don't know
like
anything.
there's something else all the way up there going on, like making
right,
fate happen.
Yeah, it's just the thing is, if we can look at Bran and know for a fact, like, oh, Bloodraven's doing this, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call him, like he's having this influence on Bran, he sent this vision to him, which changed it into the Three-Eyed Raven. I just don't see how we can read these dreams from Dany and be like, oh yeah, that's just happening.
Right. Right. Yeah.
and,
who is giving her those dreams? Like, if Bloodraven's
right?
doing it to Bran, then who is doing it to Dany? Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Now I don't know. It could be the dragons themselves. We were talking about that just before. How there is a connection between the dragons and Dany at this point that we think there possibly could be there.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? Maybe it's just the dragons sending their energy, their strength to her. But I mean, who knows? It could be something a little more sinister. It could be a whole person who's doing this to her. It could be R'hllor, the Red God.
That's kind of where
Maybe
I was starting to go too. When you first said that, I was like, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, because we know that the Red God. Man, I can't wait to get into more about that. But we know the Red God is very flashy. He does a lot of obvious things to
Mm-hmm.
bring belief and bring faith in him. And there's a whole other theory about that. But I don't know. Maybe he has his hand in this. I don't know. It's something I'm really going to look for because it hit me when I was reading this. And I was like, oh, man, this is a rabbit hole. I am 100% okay. Okay, cool. I think that was a great breakdown of that dream. Is there anything else about it that you wanted to share?
No, I think that was pretty much all I had on it.
Okay. Sounds good. So I mentioned at the beginning when we talked about Viserys not being in the dream about kind of the power shift and how she looked upon Viserys and was like, this guy is so pitiful. How could I not see it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, like, do you think it was just the abuse that was hiding that? Like why did it take so long for Dany to realize how pitiful Viserys is?
I think because for so long it had just been, I know people took them in, but for so long it had just been Dany and Viserys, and Viserys has been filling Dany with all of these things in her head, like, oh, the people are chanting my name back at home, and the peasants want us because we're supposed to be on the throne, and everything that until she had somebody there to like embrace her feelings of Viserys, like she didn't believe them. You know what I mean? It's almost like a no, he can't be that bad. You know what I mean? It's just because it's just me. You know what I mean? But until Jorah really starts telling her like, no, he's a snake, that I think that really is when she's like, you know, he's right, and I've been right this whole entire time about him.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's just she was just in this world for so long, her whole life, basically, because she was born on Dragonstone, her mother died, her father was the Mad King going crazy in King's Landing, and all she had was Viserys.
Yeah.
And I think Viserys, well, I don't think he was abusive and terrible her whole life. I think they just hit a point where he completely controlled everything that she saw, everything she believed.
Yep.
And now it's like, whoa, like it's like I haven't seen this movie, but I'm assuming it's something like that. There's a movie called Room, where it talks about it's a movie about this mother and son, where basically like her husband basically traps her in this room for like 20 years or something crazy like that. And I imagine it'd be something like that. Like once you get out, it's like this whole new world is opened up to you, and you didn't even realize it. And I just really like that line of her realizing how pitiful he is. Anyways, Madison had a comment here I'd just like to read. She says, some people are really critical of this chapter. People, they call it glorifying Stockholm Syndrome because she falls in love with her rapist. But I like the perspective that she is kind of a different person, quote unquote, after the baptism dream. So I do lean on the other side that I think, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's glorifying it, but I think people do need to read this chapter just a little more seriously and realize, like, okay, like, yes, she takes control of the situation and she does become a different person, I would say, but I don't think that degrades, I don't think that's the right word, but kind of, you know, softens the blow of what is actually happening here.
Yeah, you know, she like adapts to the situation, but it still doesn't make it okay.
Oh, yeah, it's not I don't know, it's weird to say, and I don't know if I'm right, but it's almost not a good thing that she has. Like, the fact that she has to adapt to the situation doesn't mean it's a good thing that she did it.
Yeah, I will say, though,
I don't know if that's right. I apologize.
I get the whole thinking of her as, like, a different person kind of thing after the baptism, because show-wise, that's kind of how I, like, justify Daenerys' end. Like, I think of Queen Daenerys and Khaleesi Daenerys as, like, two separate people, just to kind of make my heart feel a little bit better.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's almost like she does become kind of like a different character. So I can kind of see that, where it's almost like looking at a different character, but I don't, you know, it just because she adapted doesn't mean make it okay.
Yeah. And Madison said, she said, that does justify her rape by any means. Definitely not. I don't know, just apologize if I made it come off that way. I'm a guy in this situation. So just apologize if I said something that didn't flow very well. But anyways, let's see. So that was one of the questions. Let's see. So what did you think about Jorah just completely blowing off Viserys like that quick?
So at first, because of the show, he's so, like, starstruck for Daenerys and he loves her so much, I was like, well, you know, Viserys is a snake and he's not really king yet. I mean, he says he is, but he's not. So I was kind of like, this is one that I can say that, you know, the oath kind of was like well, if he breaks it, he breaks it. But then I also wondered, at this point in time, did he have an ulterior motive? Because he's the spy right now. So did he realize that Dany is the bigger threat? And that's why he decided to forsake Viserys for Dany.
I mean, it wouldn't shock me. That would go along with Illyrio's decision to let Viserys go. Maybe Illyrio was like, you know what, Viserys, you go ahead. And then he was like, hey, Jorah, come here. Let's figure this out for a second. No, I agree with that. One thing I found kind of interesting was so Jorah basically is like, no, I'm not gonna hurt Dany. I'm not going to try and kill Dothraki, which is really a stupid order to follow anyways. Because
Right.
I'm like, dude, he's going to die if he does that. You know, Viserys is basically like, hey, kill yourself because I told you to. That's what
Pretty
it is.
much,
When you boil
yeah.
it down to it. So they go out. Him and Dany go out and says, let's see. So Sir Jorah snorted, "Can you wake the dead girl? Your brother Rhaegar was the last dragon, and he died on the trident. Viserys is less than the shadow of a snake." His blunt words startled her. Blah, blah, blah. It says, you swore him your sword. "That I did, girl," Sir Jorah said. "And if your brother is the shadow of a snake, what does that make his servants?" His voice was bitter. And I just found that kind of interesting that his voice was bitter about it. I wonder if basically he swore that oath and he was planning on keeping that oath, and then Viserys basically put him in a situation of either you die or you break your oath, and Jorah decided to break his oath, which he wasn't happy about. So I don't like. I guess that kind of brings in how honorable is Jorah Mormont.
Well, that's what I had also made a mention about too. Is like, what does that say about his character that he broke the oath?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's that contradiction again, because just depending on how sneaky he really is, he either, you know, the person he gave swore an oath to, put him in a dire situation, you know, live or die situation, and he chose live. Or is he just like, well, you know, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it.
It's definitely an interesting thought. I mean, there's so many oaths. I mean, Jaime's the big, the big
Oath
one when it
breaker,
comes to
yeah.
oath breaking and talking about, they make you swear so many oaths. Which one do you follow?
Mm-hmm.
And so on and so on. So, I mean, I don't blame him for,
No.
I don't blame him in any way. But I think it does just kind of show us a little bit about him, like that he is focused on living.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you're right. Maybe he has shifted the focus to Dany. He's like, okay, Dany's the one I got to focus on. She's the one I got to be close to in order to get information and send it back to
get his
Varys
pardon.
Illyrio.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Because at this moment, he's not. He is more focused on I want to go home.
Right. And that's why
he's not really
he says
focusing
home with such a longing. His voice
right?
thick with longing or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yes, Madison, he is
a douchebag.
Viserys is
Yeah.
a douchebag. Exactly. So while we're on the topic of Jorah, I found it kind of interesting. Let's see, where did I put it? When he talks, here we go. When it talks about Sir Jorah's description, because it's very different from the show, because Ian Glenn is just a chiseled, amazing man.
He is. He's very handsome.
But it said, the knight smiled. Sir Jorah was not a handsome man.
No.
Already we're off. He had a neck and shoulders like a bull, and coarse black hair covered his arms and chest so thickly that there was none left for his head. Yet his smiles gave Dany comfort. Okay, so this is a situation where I don't know, like literally, Ian Glenn did such an amazing job as Jorah, in my opinion. There's a handful of people who don't really like him just as a character in general, but I feel like Ian Glenn did such a good job that it doesn't really matter to me that the descriptions are so different. I'm just like,
yeah, no, it doesn't bother me either. Except for the fact that I guess his description in the books does make him just that much more darker, creepier, shadier. You know what I mean? But no, I'm definitely okay with a switch.
Right. That voice.
I know.
Okay, here we got a couple. We got a couple questions here. Dana Daw asks us, at what point does he become totally loyal to Dany? What was the turning point? Do you have a thought on that? I have a little one that I'm not 100%. Yeah. Madison mentioned the funeral pyre.
That's what I was just gonna say, because I haven't read it yet. According to the show, I think that was the true defining moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was the big moment. That was the moment he realized, like, okay, this woman is someone completely different than what I thought it was, and she's going to be something way stronger than what I thought she could ever be. I'm going to keep an eye on it, though, because there is some, as we read on, there is some shady conversation he has. There's actually a chapter where he talks about bringing Dany to a shy, like, throughout the whole chapter, and it's really weird, to be honest. I'm going to keep an eye on that, Dana, for sure. Madison's question here is, why do you think they made such a drastic casting difference?
Because Ian Glenn's amazing,
Honest-
so they just fell in love with him.
that was it. Ian Glenn just walked in, and they were like, "Doesn't
That's it.
matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter at all." No, personally, I think I don't know. Just attractive people sell things better.
Mhm.
That's terrible to say, and I feel like an ass saying that, but
Makes you feel more
I don't know.
for him, really. Makes you
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
more friend
right?
zone. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, the thing is this, even if you think about it, Arya is not supposed to be attractive
Hmm.
in the show at all.
No.
Like it talks about in the books how her face was a lot longer. That's why
Yeah.
she's called
Arya
Arya Horseface in the books.
yeah.
And I think it's just sort of a Hollywood thing, you know? It's like, okay, like we just, hire attractive people. It makes it more pleasing to watch.
Mhm.
I feel like such a dick.
No,
saying
but it's
that,
true. It's true.
It's just true. It's just kind of the way it is, and it's kind of unfortunate, but it's just kind of the way our
Mhm.
brains work. And yes, I would like Ian Glenn to read the audiobooks. I want him to actually just narrate my life
Right?
just
Yeah.
throughout my day. I'd be okay with that. By the way, what's his name? The guy who plays Viserys, I think his name's Harry Lloyd, in the show. He does the audiobooks for The Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and I think Fire and Blood as well, and apparently it is just like your knees go soft over it. Or your legs turn to jello. That's the better way to say it. Okay, let's see. Did I have any other questions? Let's see. Oh no, okay. I already answered that. Let's see. What gave I think that's all of my discussion questions. I just got a couple of miscellaneous things I'd like to mention. I already talked about Ian Glenn just being amazing.
Mhm.
Did that.
Priorities. We got that out of the way.
Yeah. That's basically what the show is all about. Is just talking about how amazing it is. Okay, so here's an interesting quote I found in the book. Let's see. Okay, so I just want us all to realize how big this Khalasar is. I mean, I think it's like 10,000 people, maybe more.
Yeah, I think it said something like that.
Yeah, and that's a lot
That's
of
a lot of people. Yeah.
Like, that's a lot of people. So it's talking about their travels, and then it says this. As the riding became less an ordeal, Dany began to notice the beauties of the land around her. She rode at the head of the Khalasar with Drogo and his blood riders, so she came to each country fresh and unspoiled. Behind them, the great horde might tear the earth and muddy the rivers and send up clouds of choking dust, but the fields ahead of them were always green and verdant. And I think that is just the exact definition of how Dany is going to end up ruling. Especially, it has happened in the books where she has departed Essos to go to Westeros, but that's basically what she faces throughout the whole thing. Is she goes to these places like Marine and all these places. She makes these changes and then she leaves, and she leaves the destruction behind her.
Yes. Yeah, I had picked up on that too. It was like when you first read it, it's almost like, is she ignoring the carnage that they're like trying to put it out of her mind, like, to make it better for herself. And then I was like, no, this is exactly what she does every time.
Yeah, it's just tough to swallow, just because we like Dany.
We do
She's
like
a great
Dany.
character.
Yeah.
And it stinks to think that. I mean, she just ends up being very focused on herself. She does sort of. I don't know. People can correct me on this, but I feel like eventually she almost adopts the same views Viserys had, as this is my right, and I'm going to take Westeros back because it is mine. And she focuses on herself, which this is kind of an offshoot, but it's kind of very opposite of Jon Snow.
Yeah, he's always
he's the ice to her fire, and he's very for the realm. He's very, let's bring the wildlings past the wall. Let's get everything okay. Let's make sure everyone's fine. Like he sacrifices Jon sacrifices himself for others, and Dany's sacrificing others for herself.
Yeah,
basically. That's just kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Snaps for Harrison.
Madison said that we need to have a girl crush episode, and once we get to Melisandre, I'll rave. Man, she is so pretty. Okay, Anyways, okay, let's see. That was one. Okay. So she's talking about her travels, and she brings up the forest of Qohor, how it's just
Mhm.
the trees are like giant. There's all these great animals in there, and I was just like, I want to go there real bad. Just a small little thing there.
Yeah.
It sounded so pretty. Let's see. Did you have any miscellaneous thoughts you wanted to share before we get to near the end?
I liked the. Let's see. I'm trying to see. What did I do? Of course, I got to do a shout out to my favorite quote. Not a queen, a Khaleesi. I've got it tattooed on my back.
Boom. I didn't know that,
Yeah.
and that is really cool. That is super cool. Good job.
Let's see. Did I have anything else little
see.
before we get to like the story of how the dragons came to be and everything? I don't think so.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, okay. Here, I'm going to mention this one real quick.
Mhm.
It wasn't a direct foreshadow, but I think it gave us the reason why Viserys died. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Let's see, I can't find it fast enough. But basically, when Dany goes out by herself to kind of be in the Dothraki Sea and kind of reflect on her journey, and then Viserys comes up and is just like, rah, you know.
Yeah.
One thing that happens is he basically looks at her and says, "Look what you've become. You're wearing Dothraki rags. You've completely changed who you are." And then Dany reflects on Viserys and is like, he's still wearing the silks of the city. They're totally drenched and destroyed
Mhm.
and ruined. And honestly, I think that is why the reason why Viserys died is because he's not adapting to
Right.
what
He
is around
refuses
him.
to change.
Yeah, he's like, this is who I am. I'm staying the way I am, and I have the right to do that. And Dany is the opposite. She's. I mean, it goes along with what happens in this chapter. How while she's being raped every night, she ends up adapting and changing, and to the
Mhm.
point where she is taking more control in their sex life. And her, accepting Dothraki culture in her life and having it surround her. That's how she survives, and that's why Viserys is dead.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting because they explain, like, she's wearing um, a green vest that she got as a bride gift, and her hair has got the Dothraki oils in it, and the rings and everything. And then when she goes to describe Viserys and what he's wearing, it says she did not even have to look. And then it's like
Mm-hmm.
Viserys was in the stained clothes and everything, and it's like, she doesn't even have to question it. He's not adapting to the Dothraki way of life, which she questions way back in the beginning, like, why did you even come? You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. God. I have one more thought. I need to find the quote. So, do you have any thoughts on the dragon story that you want to share while I look for this?
I like the dragon story. I think it's poetic, and I think it's just an interesting take that the Dothraki have on how the dragons came to be and everything. But I do think that it's interesting. Where is it? I wrote it down. Oh, it says one day. So the story of the dragons and how they came to be is that there was two moons, and one moon got too close to the sun and it cracked from the heat, and 1,000 dragons spilled out and they drank the fire of the sun, and that's why they breathed flames. So then at one point, Doria the handmaiden says, one day the other moon will rise and kiss the sun too, and then it will crack and the dragons will return. And I think it's interesting that Drogo calls Dany the moon of his life, because when she gets too close to the funeral pyre, the eggs crack and the dragons
Right.
come back. So I thought I was like, oh, I get it.
I get the thing. Well,
Yeah.
well, what's really cool about that is that. Okay, I'm almost done, honey.
I'm sorry, we're almost done.
Sorry. It's so no, I totally agree with that. That's exactly what it means. I mean, it's kind of a cool like oh yeah, one moon cracks and now there's another one. It's very like there's another one coming. This is going to happen again, and then we get the satisfaction of it actually happening at the end. Man, I can't. Maybe you know where this is. She talks about King's Landing and how all the doors are red. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't find
So
the quote.
she says it's when Jorah talks about wanting to go home, and she
Yeah.
says, hold on. Let's see. Oh, what do you pray for, Sir Jorah? She asked him. Home, he said. His voice was thick with longing. I pray for home, too, she told him, believing it. Sir Jorah laughed. Look around you then, Khaleesi. And then it goes to say, but it was not the plains that Dany saw then. It was King's Landing and the great red keep that Aegon the Conqueror had built. It was Dragonstone where she had been born. In her mind's eye, they burned with 1,000 lights, a fire blazing in every window. In her mind's eye, all the doors were red.
Okay. So, before season 8, that line was, in my mind and a lot of people's mind, was like basically she sees King's Landing as her home because it relates to the red door that she had in Bravos or wherever. And was like, oh, I want to go back to the house with the red door. That's where I feel comfortable. That's where I feel loved. But with the knowledge that King's Landing is going to burn, which I believe will happen, I think it'll happen a little differently in the book. But with the knowledge that that's going to happen, that line just goes a completely different direction.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very like there's a fire blazing in every window. All the doors are red from the blood, from the fire. And it's just so like...
It was there. Like, it was there the whole time.
Yeah, it's like, okay, it was there. And it's also like, I don't know, just one of those things you think is really innocent. And then you learn the background. You're like, oh.
Yeah,
like,
how did I miss that? Yeah.
Yeah, right? So yeah, that's probably my last miscellaneous thought that I have on the chapter, and it just, I mean, that one just hit me like a ton of bricks when I read it.
Me too.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Do you have anything else you want to share?
No, I think that was pretty much all I had.
Well, awesome. I'm gonna go rescue my wife from my children.
Yes, go rescue.
And love them. Lastly, I just want to say, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I saw 5 or 6 people pop in here.
Yeah, that was really fun.
It
was nice to see comments.
Yeah, it was really good to see comments. Thank you so much, Brooke, for joining us today. Like I said, guys, if you have any questions, any comments, things you just want to share with us, you can either message us on Facebook. You can email us at TheReadersontheWall@gmail.com. That's just the name of the podcast with Gmail at the end. And we're really excited to come back with you next week. Just a little update from me. So at this point, like I said, I think we've done 5 episodes so far.
Yep.
I've been recording just the audio portion of the episodes, and I'm hoping that I can go through and edit them to kind of shrink them down a little bit, get rid of the the blank spaces, things that we don't really need in the show, and hopefully I can post them up for people to download them so they can listen to them, while you're at work or while you're at home. It just makes it a little easier so you don't have to, sit and watch it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, definitely.
So I'm working on that. I'll keep you posted. We might end up putting up a Facebook group that's just for our podcast. I don't know. I haven't really discussed that with Brooke and with Madison, but we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
Just want to say thank you guys for joining us tonight. I had a great time.
Yeah, me too. And, it was fun. We miss you, Madison.
Sweet. Yeah, we miss you so much. Sadly, Madison won't, as far as I remember, Madison won't be able to join us next week either.
No, I don't think so.
Which makes me bummed out.
Yeah.
But guys, join us next week, please. This was really fun, and we'll see you next time, okay?
All right. Bye, Harrison.
Bye, guys. See ya.
Bye, guys.